Well, it's 2026, and what better way to start the year than with a new instrument release? Here is Festive Celeste. This instrument started with a very simple premise. We obtained a brand new Schiedmayer 5.5 octave Celeste this past summer at my work, and when I first saw this thing, I immediately knew I was going to have to record it and turn it into a virtual instrument. It's just mechanically so interesting. It's such a beautiful work of craftsmanship, and mechanically it's so complex. I knew that I wanted to turn it into something, and so that's what I did last month. The approach started out pretty simple. I had originally thought to sample the instrument in fifths and do a bunch of velocity layers so that it would have a real sense of dynamic realism, but as soon as I sat down at the keyboard during the recording session and quickly understood how three-dimensional the sound of this instrument is, I knew that plan wasn't going to work. If you know how a Celeste functions, it's essentially a bunch of hammers like a piano, but they're felt, and they hit these little metal bars, and underneath those bars are these resonator boxes which help the notes speak. But because of the confines of the cabinet and how small this thing is, the instrument makers have to shove all of these resonator boxes and mechanics into a very small space, and the result is that you have this really crazy three-dimensional thing where, for instance, C2 sounds on the left side of the instrument, but then just a major third above that, E2, sounds from the right. So when you're playing it, you hear the notes sounding from like all over the place. And in order to preserve that complexity and that distinct character, I had to sample every key, so that's what I did. So the result is ultimately less velocity layers, but hopefully what is a very detailed, localized, and unique perspective on the Celeste. And to complement that, you know me, I always have to complicate things. So I thought, well, let's make it extra special and put a little sparkle on top, and we'll include a Chimes library recorded with the same mic setups that I used for the Celeste, and give you the ability to crossfade between them. Ultimately, the success of those combinations, I think, is up for debate. But what you get are two distinct libraries that you can use either in conjunction or independently from one another. Like everything I design, I wanted to give you as much flexibility as possible to configure it how you want. So the controls can get a little complex, but in any case, I'm going to walk you through the interface, show you a bunch of the settings, and hopefully paint a clear picture of what is possible when you open Festive Celeste. So let's head over to the computer and we'll get started. Welcome to the Festive Celeste interface. If you open the first preset, which is labeled, unsurprisingly, Festive Celeste, you're getting essentially an equal blend between the Celeste and the Chimes with the preferred mic mix that I put together, which you can totally change and make your own. The opening patch doesn't sound like one or the other. It's a combination of the two. Now, obviously, that's not going to fit every palette. So if you want just the Celeste by itself or just the Chimes by itself, there's this big crossfade button or knob in the middle, which you can either control with your mouse. All the way to the left is Celeste by itself. And all the way to the right is Chimes by themselves. So going back to the Celeste, both instruments sections are set up essentially the same. The top three knobs control the balance between the different microphone arrays and placements. Close by themselves. Very intimate, very present, very close. Sounds so nice. If you ask my personal opinion, this is kind of the killer app for this particular instrument. I've never heard a Celeste sample library this detailed and this close and intimate. So that is something to keep an eye out for. But without those, you've got the mid mics, which are at a more conventional kind of miking distance for this instrument. I should note that I recorded these in a very nice sized room, very high ceilings, wooden floors. So there is a bit of room ambience in the middle and far microphones, which reveal the character of the acoustics of the space. And lastly, the far mics, which are treated much more like a ambient room microphone, but they do have a nice kind of orchestral vibe to them. If you were going to use this in an orchestral setting, you might want to reach for this first. But as I said, you can blend in the taste as I have here. Stop me if you've heard that before. Same goes for the chimes. It's the same close, mid, and far mic setup, so you can blend those to taste. The dynamics knob gives you kind of a macro control over the velocity to volume response of the instrument. It's a very gradual S-curve, so if you do quiet dynamics, you can get from very quiet to very loud quite naturally, and there's velocity layers which help communicate that transition. But in some cases, that's not going to work because it's so dynamic, it might get lost in the mix. So if you want to scale this down, what this does is reduce the range of dynamics that the velocity translates to. So moving on to the tone knob, this is again kind of a macro knob which controls both a high pass filter and a low pass filter. So if you move it to the left, you start to lose the highs, you get a more mellow, soft sound out of the instrument. Also goes for the chimes. And if you move it to the right, you lose the low end of the instrument and it gets a little more bright, a little more clarity is added. The way that routing inside the instrument works is through the use of buses, and the Celeste microphones and the chimes all run through their own bus processing. That's how we're able to have very granular control over every single mic source if you want it. But the volume, this is a macro knob. Again, everything on the first page is essentially a macro. So as was the case with the dynamics knob, the tone knob, the volume macro controls the overall volume of all of the Celeste mics on the left side, and the volume knob on the right controls the mix of all of the microphones for the chimes. So that's it. That's it for the homepage. If you noticed here, you've got three icons. The middle cog is for detailed settings. And then the last one is for reverb and some specialized processing specific to this instrument. But to demonstrate the settings knobs, we're just going to focus on the Celeste close mics by themselves. So clicking the cog, that takes us to this view, which is hopefully set up in a very straightforward way. You have 6 columns of knobs. Each of those columns reflects the microphone array that corresponds to it at the top of the column. So if we're going to be playing with the settings of the Celeste close mics, we're going to focus on this first column here. Just as in the main window, you have a dynamic scaling control. So right now is at its default. You've got a wide variety of dynamics, but if that's too much, you pull this down. And that range gets condensed. Attack knob, this controls, surprise, surprise, the attack of the envelope. If you're using it in a conventional sense, you don't necessarily need to play with this, but if, say, you wanted to create a more synth-like texture, if you up the... Anyways, that's the attack knob. You can adjust the attack of each mic sample bank individually. So you can get really wild with this and make some pretty unnatural sounds. Release is what it says on the tin. It controls the release of each sample. You put it all the way up, you get kind of one shots whenever you strike a key. Probably more useful in the context of the chimes, but it's there nonetheless. The rev knob stands for reverb, surprise, surprise, which you can control the settings of in the next tab. So we'll come back to that. With, as with all my instruments, I appreciate a very wide stereo image as the default, but if, say you've got a very lush arrangement with tons of instruments and whatever going on, this allows you to localize the mics in everything from entirely monophonic. So if you pull it all the way to the left, or if you pull it all the way to the right, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but you can, it allows you to do hyper stereo stuff. So be careful with this because it'll be definitely out of phase. So we'll put it back to mono just for demonstration of the next knob, but you have a pan knob, which does what it says. Let's put up the reverb knob just a touch and click over to our third tab, which has processing settings. This instrument includes an impulse response package, which I've included with some of my other instruments. Typical controls here of pre-delay. So if you need to delay the onset of the reverb slightly, you can do that. You can modify the decay of each impulse response if you want to. You control the return volume of the reverb send. And there's high pass and low pass filters to do to your liking. So Celeste in a nuclear reactor. Don't copyright strike me. Cool, so that's the reverb. You've got a bunch of settings here, and I included little descriptions in parentheses to kind of relate them to commonly labeled reverb settings. You have a reverse knob too, which I didn't mention, which is pretty cool. Neat. And then two specific settings for this instrument. So I'm going to turn the reverb off for a second just by selecting bypass from the menu. So now we've got just the close mics. When I recorded the Celeste, there was quite a bit of mechanical noise, which I actually like. I think it adds to the uniqueness and character of the library quite a bit. But when you get to the high register of the notes, it can compete with the actual tone in some cases of the resonators and the tone bars. So there are two groups of samples for the high register. One includes a high pass filter, which is set specifically for the range in each case, and one that is not. So if with this off, you get the full mechanical noise all the way up to the high register. You can hear the whack of the hammers kind of very presently. And then if you turn this on, that gets subtly reduced. As I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to do something special in terms of having this not just be a Celeste library, but to be a Celeste and Chimes library. That's not really useful for everybody. So if you find that the crossfade is causing you issues, or you don't want to use the instrument in that fashion, you can actually just hit this and it will hide the crossfade knob from the main interface, and you can mix them or use them independently as you like. So that's it, Festive Celeste. I really hope you enjoy playing around with this instrument. It was a ton of work, but was a great opportunity to learn how to refine my sampling and recording skills for this instrument, but also data management. The process of post-producing this thing was intensive. There's over 3,000 samples included in the library. So I hope that work comes across, and I hope you are able to incorporate this into your orchestral templates, your pop productions, whatever the case may be. There's just so much possibility with this library. If you enjoy instruments like this and you want to keep on top of my releases, you know what to do. Hit the like button and subscribe for all future releases and updates. As is my nature, I'm already working on the next release. If you follow this channel, you may have seen a few months back, I released a short that demonstrated me using friction mallets on a bunch of surfaces like timpani, bass drum, snare drum, cymbals. So I think that's where we're headed next. So stay tuned for that. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.